Ciao.
This episode of In a Few Minutes is sponsored by BetterHelp, online counseling that's there for you. Join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health at BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, betterhelp.com/afew.
What year is it?
It was brand new.
No. What year is it?
Kidding me? What's cooler than this? It's me talking to Peter Cohen. And leave off the me part. It's Peter Cohen, everybody. Peter Cohen of RCR Wireless, online at rcrwireless.com. And you can also follow him on Twitter, Flargh. Flarg.
Yes.
Yes. I think you were about to say something.
Nah, I'm just...
No, okay. All right. Well, then, I'll do that. So Michael Gartenberg posted a thing, and the thing is, I didn't realize until later, it might be somebody that he's related to. I believe it was somebody named Chaim Gartenberg. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name right or not, but it was an article in The Verge, and the article in The Verge had this person saying that Apple needs to quit with the annual software updates. The argument was just not exciting. The annual update is just not exciting, and so maybe they shouldn't do that. Maybe they should come out with updates when they have exciting things. And the problem that I had was the idea that it needs to be exciting. Here, I'll read you the first paragraph. Apple's fall software updates, iOS 15 and macOS Monterey, are officially out in the world for everyone. But Apple's latest software has arrived with more of a whimper than a bang. The two updates are not so much bad as they are boring, which has me wondering, why is Apple still clinging to an annual release schedule at all? Now, there's some other interesting stuff in there. I mean, the author does acknowledge the fact that, okay, there have been some changes, there have been some tweaks, but maybe Apple shouldn't marry itself to an annual thing because, I don't know, in the middle of the pandemic probably would have been a great time to make a lot of the changes that they made to FaceTime instead of waiting until the fall of 2021, which was the next time they had, wholesale changes planned. At the same time, the complaint that it's boring, I kind of want my software updates to be boring. I want them to be better in a way that's intuitive. I don't necessarily want it to be whiz bang, because then I got to learn, what makes what whiz and why. So I'm curious, just on that very bare reading, share your thoughts if you would.
Where do I start to unpack this nonsense? Okay.
Well, is it nonsense necessarily? I mean, I think there's some, but not all. But go ahead.
I think that first of all, let me address the boring elephant in the room, the boring, gray, sad elephant in the room. Mm-hmm. Apple's. If the complaint is that Apple's updates are boring, mm-hmm. that is the most privileged, just eye-watering nonsense from a tech reporter to say, I should live a life that is boring and free of challenges. I mean, come on. Like, if we're saying, like, Apple released something that didn't, like, blow my mind, mm-hmm. grow up. Just try to. Hey, anyway, look.
Yeah.
But I've got to say that aside, just the tonality of it being silly and trivial and not worth taking seriously. Mm-hmm. The other part of this is that, if you are looking at this from a DevOps perspective, as a lot of us do now, because we all live in the cloud and that's how we're expected to think, you got to think in terms of a workflow process that's more or less continuous integration and continuous development. The idea that you are continuously providing incremental improvement to your services and your capabilities. But the problem is that when you're trying to move a massive framework that an entire ecosystem of developers is based on, there's got to be some breakpoints that make it rational to start rolling new features in. I remember a few years ago, Microsoft made the statement that Windows 10 was going to be the last version of Windows, that 10 was where it was going to be at. And, people didn't understand the esoteric message, which is, yeah, we're just going to do incremental updates and make wholesale changes to Windows, which is exactly what I'm talking about. But that message kind of got lost in the weeds. But yeah, that's one way to do things. But like I said, there's this entire other ecosystem, and the fact of the matter is that Apple's annualized update cycle also gives it very clear product cycle for juicing products, and it knows when it's going to sell stuff. It knows when it's going to be able to make stuff, more or less. So, suggesting that Apple should disrupt its entire ecosystem, its entire, life cycle for its products, I think kind of misses everything about the way that this company works.
Yeah, there were a couple of things in the article that were like, well, I mean, first of all, the acknowledgement that, yes, there are things they could have done before this fall that would have been better. When they made the changes to FaceTime, where it's like, oh, yeah, everything's sort of floating around and the person who's talking is bigger and all that stuff. It's like, okay, so you're just going to cede the video conferencing for business for at least another year. Because while that's neat and cute for, grandma and the kids and stuff like that, it's not necessarily a business thing. So I can see making a case that you don't necessarily wait a year for a big change. At the same time, they don't. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, I know it goes from 14 to 15 in the fall, or from 13 to 14 in the fall, or whatever. But App Tracking Transparency, I think, started in April. It was originally supposed to start in the fall of 2020. And then, different companies said, well, this is going to, mess us up. Can you give us time to work on it? They, of course, didn't spend that time actually working on it. They spent that time grousing. But, Apple made a big change divorced from when the release was. There are a number of things, as acknowledged in this article as well, there are a number of things that were supposed to be coming out with this fall's updates. They're like, oh, yeah, right, that's going to be a little bit. It's going to be like in another month or two. It's going to be before the end of the year.
Yeah, universal control, anyone?
Yeah, exactly, stuff like that. I mean, the other thing, though, that I think you just sort of touched on a little bit. The article kind of like poo-poos it a tiny bit, saying, okay, the one thing that Apple can count on is everybody is going to write about their updates when the update hits, if it always hits at the same time. That's not nothing. That's the largest company on the planet, knowing that they can command a certain amount of a certain number of inches on any tech site. They're guaranteed to get write-ups about this stuff, and then other sites will also do write-ups, and then other sites will pull from those two write-ups and make write-ups of their own. It's not. That's an easier thing to bank on, and it's an easier thing for the consumer to bank on as well. Even if it's not going to be a gigantic change or the most exciting thing that ever happened, it's a point on the calendar where they know if they're keeping up with that, then they're keeping up, or they can feel that way anyway.
I think that when you observe the world from an ecosystem like Android, where, fragmentation is rampant and, it's just complete chaos about if or whether, depending on how you've got your stuff installed and which hardware it's working on, whether or not you're ever going to get patches or updates to what you need. I think it's self-evident that when you see stuff like iOS 15 adoption rates approaching like 70% already, Apple's got, I think, a better end-to-end ecosystem for managing this stuff out and for minimizing a lot of the problems that a lot of us take for granted elsewhere. Having said that, no system is perfect, and Apple certainly has had some rough patches. And where I would agree with him definitely is that it's been disquieting to see Apple sort of fall down on delivering, I think, the solid stuff that we expect them to. But on the other hand, we all know, based on our own experience, what Apple and every other company has been through, and what we've all been through individually, trying to deal with the last 18 months. It's disrupted everything. It's disrupted supply chains. It's disrupted our ability to count on contractors. It's disrupted our ability to communicate with one another. So expecting Apple to come out of the last 18 months unblemished, I think, is remarkably uncharitable, and probably at the end of the day just bitterly unrealistic.
When the pandemic hit, lots of businesses and services moved online. BetterHelp, sponsor of today's show, was already there, already connecting licensed professional therapists with folks like you and me in a safe and private online environment. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. BetterHelp is licensed professional counselors who are ready to work with you on depression, relationship issues, self-esteem, the kinds of things about which you might go to see a counselor can happen right where you are. It's on your phone, your tablet, your computer. You're not limited by who's in your area. BetterHelp works to find the right counselor for you, and if it turns out that they're not the right fit, switching to a new counselor is incredibly easy. So many people have been using BetterHelp that they're recruiting additional counselors in all 50 states. BetterHelp is more affordable than traditional offline counseling, but if you need it, financial aid is available. As a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting our sponsor at betterhelp.com/afew. That's HELP. betterhelp.com/afew, as in a few minutes. Join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP, betterhelp.com/afew. And thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's show. Continuing our conversation with Peter Cohen, RCRWireless.com is where you can find his work, or you can just follow his not work on Twitter, Flarg, Flargh, at Flarg, or twitter.com/Flarg, spelled almost like it sounds. There was something that was a long time ago, before the wind, before the snow. When the first iPad came out, I was excited about the iPad, and I thought the iPad was going to be a bit like the Mac, in that we would get an iPad when it was time for an iPad. And then the next year, they said, here's the second iPad. And I was honestly disappointed, because instead of being a device that was going to be, ready when it was ready and out when it was out, it became an annual thing. And what's funny is I've had it in my head that that's the way the iPad is. And I've always sort of carried that as a disappointment. And then I realized at the Spring Loaded event, there was an iPad. I can't remember which one. Earlier this year, there was another iPad. We don't know when the next iPad Pro is going to come out. Of course, as you talked about in the last segment, supply chains and shipping and all sorts of things are kind of playing havoc with that. It looks like Apple, based on the last earnings call, decided they were sacrificing iPad this quarter so that they could, concentrate on the other things that people would buy, iPhone and things like that. I found it fascinating when Luca Maestri said, we're going to miss on iPad next quarter. The sales are going to decline. And I thought, well, that's really weird and specific. How can you know that about that one product and not the others? And then you got to try to order an iPad. And they're like, yeah, you need to order it by like the 15th of November if you want it by Christmas. They've seriously decided to do that. Is the iPhone, I guess iPhone and Apple Watch are actually the only things that are on an annual cycle at this point, aren't they? And hang on, I apologize because I'm going to let you answer. Even the iPhone SE, now that I think about it, kind of messes that up, because if there's going to be one, it's probably going to be in the spring. Is Apple Watch actually the only annual product now?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what I understand the criticism about the the sort of the iOS and, for that matter, Mac OS, because they're more or less linked. Mm-hmm. I mean, the whole ecosystem update process is more or less linked to an annual calendar cycle. But you are correct in that doesn't correlate one-to-one with their hardware refresh cycle at all.
Yeah.
But again, I'm going back to my previous point about how, when they're doing these things, they're bringing this gigantic ecosystem of millions of developers who are creating apps, as well as a lot of enterprises that are depending on their apps to work as well. I mean, I just in the past year, I think I've worked for 2 different companies that have depended on apps frameworks in the App Store to either pay me or account for my time. This stuff is a necessary infrastructure for so many of us. Apple has to take a measured process, a measured response to getting it out, or there will be chaos. The alternative is unthinkable.
Dogs and cats living together.